Recently on our sister podcast, We Out of Pride, I caught up with renowned radio host and longtime Fitzroy and Brisbane Lions supporter Neil Butler for a bit of a chat about his history with the football club, which began back in the mid-60s as a Fitzroy supporter from the time he was born. And we also had a bit of a chat about Micky Conlan and a few of the other famous number 12s for the two iterations of the football club. So have a listen and hope you enjoy, and we'll be bringing you some more content very soon, including an episode about the 1916 VFL season, which Fitzroy won the premiership, and also still working away, and we'll be conducting some interviews very soon for a big episode which may go over 2 or 3 episodes, to be honest, about the merger with the Brisbane Lions or the Brisbane Bears back in 1996-97. So stay tuned for all that and keep listening and keep supporting the channel, and we will be bringing you much more content soon. Cheers.
I'm a lion through and through in my golden red and blue, and we'll fight until we get right to the top. Games at home or games away, any time or any day, we will go, go, go until we drop. Come on, Fitzroy, you can do it, you can do it, hear the call. When that final siren sounds, we'll all cheer around the ground, for Fitzroy, the greatest team of all.
I saw my first game at the Brunswick Street Oval, would you believe? I believe in 1964. My parents used to live not very far from the ground, and I used to get taken down at three-quarter time and passed through the gates when you were allowed to do that at three-quarter time. And subsequently, I've been to every ground that Fitzroy / Brisbane / the Bears have called home and seen a game of footy.
Well, there you go. You've definitely got me covered there. I was still about 11 years away when you went to your first Fitzroy game. So
was I. Don't worry about that. Well, it's interesting because, a lot of people say, why did you choose to barrack for Fitzroy? And my grandfather on my father's side was born in Alfred Crescent in North Fitzroy, which when you walk out the front door of that house, there's a ground over the road called Brunswick Street. And my other grandfather lived in Swan Hill until he was 22 and jumped on his motorcycle on the morning of the 1922 grand final, rode down from Swan Hill to Melbourne, saw the grand final and said he would barrack for the team that won the grand final. Thankfully, the Lions got up by 5 points over Collingwood. Otherwise, my life may have turned out very, very differently.
There you go. My maternal family has a pretty similar story with my great-grandfather came down from, would have been Euroa at the time, and same year. Pretty much the same scenario, and his son, my grandfather, became a diehard Fitzroy man. So I ended up having Fitzroy on both sides of my family as well. So,
yeah, well, mum and dad, as teenagers, went to see the 1944 grand final separately. They weren't together at that stage. I think one was 14 and one was 12 or something. And I saw the last Fitzroy premiership, which was in 1989 when the reserves got up and beat Geelong by half a dozen points, I think, something like that.
And Snowy Lupson and Doc Wielden might have thrown a few cut lunches here and there.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yes.
Yeah, always throw that on the end of your any accusation you make, mate. You'll be right.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I guess tell us a little bit about your more recent history with the Brisbane Lions as it is now.
Well, I just taking it back slightly to 1983. My current membership started in 1983. When I was 21-year-old. In fact, my maternal grandfather bought me that membership, and every year since then I've been a member. So I was at 42, 43 seasons in a row that I've been. So as you can imagine, I've been through the absolute lows and the absolute highs during that period of time. I was a foundation member of the Lions, obviously, in 1997. And as a result of that, I'm one of I don't know how many people who've been a member of the Brisbane Lions every year that they've been in existence, which is pretty handy. There was never any doubt that I would jump on board because I went to the merger meeting at Dallas Brooks Hall, and Kevin Murray got up and said, "I'm behind this." So if it's all right for him, it was all right for me.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing for me. I didn't go to that meeting, but I heard Kevin Murray and Jim Keys from the Masters Apprentices, probably a band you would know.
I have
Um,
interviewed the great man. Sadly,
I
no longer with us.
I heard them both on Triple M radio. It would have been the next day, I'm guessing.
Mm.
And Kevin Murray was up and about. Now I'm getting behind the new merge club, and Jim Keys already had a song organised, a new version of the theme song. And Masters Apprentices were a band that my dad was hugely into, and I grew up having to listen to them, and obviously grew to like them and knew who Jim Keys was. So
Yes.
yes,
Jimmy sadly passed away about 10 years ago. I had the good fortune to interview him. The one interview that I've done with someone like that I can't find a copy of, I'm determined to find it somewhere. But he also wrote the alternate words to the Melbourne Victory song, the one that goes to Scotland the Brave, because both songs, Glenn Wheatley had a bit of a hand in as well, and he was obviously a member of the Masters as well.
and a Fitzroy supporter as well.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So it's been a long-term investment, I guess, of emotion. I can remember 1978 was the first year in my life that we won anything apart from a raffle, and we won the night premiership that year, and also we made the finals for the first time in 1979. I remember that really clearly. So there's been lots of really exciting times, and of course then going through the process of watching Fitzroy slowly disappearing into the sunset was pretty sad.
Yeah, so I've got a little Fitzroy thing I do. I've only done a couple of episodes so far, so I may get you on because I'm going to do something about the merger. I may get you on to have a chat about that at the time as well, because I'm going to try and get some people from all sides, the lovers, the haters, the up yours Ross Oakley people, and maybe even a couple of North Melbourne people. I've got a couple of cousins on that side of the fence, unfortunately. Can't help bad luck and can't pick your relatives, right?
Absolutely. Well, interestingly, I can remember when the conversation was turning to Fitzroy merging with North Melbourne and being the cleverly named North Fitzroy Kangaroos or something, which meant the name Fitzroy might have lasted for 15 minutes in my mind. But when in my generation, which is slightly before yours, I guess, by one generation, let's call it, we were brought up to hate other clubs. And so for me to follow a Melbourne-based club that wasn't Fitzroy just wasn't going to work. So I'd made the decision that I was going to follow an interstate club once the merger took place. And the club that I'd selected was the only one in the AFL that had maroon on their jumper. They were called the Brisbane Bears. So I can remember getting a phone call one Thursday night from my mum saying, how you're going to follow the Brisbane Bears? They're not going to be the Brisbane Bears for very long. And a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah, well, like for me, I grew up in Western Australia. I'm a Victorian by birth. That's my dirty little secret. Not many people know that.
You're relatively normal, though. That's the interesting thing.
Yeah, so I grew up in country, Western Australia, lived in Darwin for a bit, but I was just about to start high school when the West Coast Eagles came along. And I'd grown up all my childhood watching waffle football on TV. We got the winners on every Saturday night with Drew Morfitt, and we got about 10 minutes of VFL football from the winners, and very occasionally saw Fitzroy, but mostly Hawthorn and Essendon and Carlton. But yeah, 1986, we finally got the VFL finals. So Fitzroy did pretty well that year. I was wrapped. But then, of course, the West Coast Eagles come along, and that's all we got. And I had to go to some games of VFL football. So I went and watched the Eagles with my mates who all jumped on board and had a bit of a fondness for them, obviously, because I grew up watching a lot of their guys play for South Freo and East Perth, and being an East Perth boy myself, and Subiaco and so forth. So, yeah, I had a bit of a fondness for them as a second team, and I nearly jumped on them. Had Fitzroy, like you, had they gone with another Melbourne club, I couldn't have followed them. And, that kills me inside to think that I could have walked away from the club that both sides of my family support. But I would have probably jumped on with the Eagles, but it wouldn't have been the same.
No, and I think there's a lot of people out there who have chosen the North Melbourne option or other Melbourne-based sides, and I'm sure they love their club, but not as much as they would, given that, when you were allocated a club at birth, there's that's the birthright. It's the birthmark, and you really can't do much about it. I was also fortunate that I grew up in the suburbs, a suburb called East Doncaster in Melbourne, and that was absolutely smack bang in the middle of Fitzroy's recruitment zone in those days.
Yes.
And the school I went to was a school called Beverly Hills Primary School. Now, there's only two things in the world called Beverly Hills, spelt the correct way with an L-E-Y, not the American version or the Sydney version. That is the Beverly Hills Primary School and the Beverly Hills Junior Football Club. That
home of Paul Roos.
Paul Roos played there. I went to school and played footy with Paul. Michael Poynton before him, Chris Smith before him. There were a number of Fitzroy players came through that school and that club. And subsequently, Mark Murphy and Christian Petrarca and Christian Jacks and a number of other kids have gone through that club at various times. But back in my day, when the Fitzroy players came out to do the clinic, there was about 1 million Collingwood, Carlton, Essendon and Hawthorn jumpers in my year level, but only one Fitzroy. So when Norm Dare came out or Paul Shanahan came out, they were the two I remember, I was always one dragged out the front to do the clinic with them.
Nice.
Yeah.
We unfortunately never got anything like that. I had my year 7 teacher played for the Eagles and later Richmond, but at the time he played for Subiaco. So that was the closest I got to having any Lions connection in my school days.
Yeah. So you were far away from the recruiting zone, weren't you?
Yeah, just slightly, like a little bit west of the Wimmera. And
yeah, very, very much west of it. Yes, that's very West Wimmera, isn't it? Yes, I tell you who I did see the other day in the street, walking the other way. If I had more chance, I would have stopped and said g'day. Micky Conlan.
Oh, yeah.
I could happily turn for Micky. He was he could still go out and kick a football. Now, he's got to be 65, I guess.
Yeah, so he would have, I think he went to the club in 77, 78?
Yeah, his last game
and he would have been about
grand final, reserves grand final.
Yeah, he would have been about 21, 22 when he went to the club. So I went to a night at the Historical Society that had Doc Wheeldon and Micky Conlan on the same night. And I remember him saying he'd played a bit of footy prior to coming to Fitzroy. So he'd have to be sort of in his 60s by now. But even that night, and that would have been back in 2018, I reckon. I said to him the same thing. I went up and it was a bit of a blubbering mess. You were my dad's favourite player, and you and Bernie Quinlan were my first favourite players when I was really little. And he sort of put his arm around me for a photo and whatever to show my dad. And then like he's put his arm around me and I've gone, mate, you are ripped. Your arm is rock hard. You should still be playing footy now. And he just laughed.
Well, of course, Doc Wheeldon and Micky Conlan have got something very much in common.
What a same number.
They did indeed, along with Matty Primus.
Yes. And, in later years after the merger, someone else wore that number who was pretty good too.
Won a Brownlow medal, as I recall.
Yes, and was an All-Australian back pocket, wingman, half-back and half-forward.
That's him.
And he never gets brought up in that conversation with Adam Goods and Matthew Pavlich as a multi-position All-Australian player, but he also won a best and fairest as a back pocket too.
Yep.
And for those playing at home who can't quite follow, it's Jason Ackermanis.
Yes, I have a number 12 jumper in my cupboard, which is a Fitzroy jumper. I think I got it for the Doc. I think it was post Micky Conlan. Micky Conlan, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can. Was the chant behind the goals at the southern end of the Junction Oval.
Yeah, back when the cheer squads were probably a little bit more colourful than what they are these days. Oh, look, they were great days. Sandy Roberts, Peter Landy, Bruce McAvaney before he became what he eventually became, and Peter McKenna. Bernie Quinlan used to be on.
Yes, he was very good, the big boy Bernie.
And Don Scott before he became an idiot.
Allegedly. See, I go back to the days of World of Sport on a Sunday, and a man who always sticks in my mind is Bruce Andrew, who in those days was the president of the Australian National Football Council, which was a sort of overriding body that ran the VFL, the Sandfall, the Waffle, and others. And I don't believe I've ever seen anyone with a sharper part down the middle of his head. He played in the Collingwood teams in the, I think, 20s and 30s, and was on World of Sport in the 60s. And my goodness me, haven't we come a long way? Brackets, not close brackets.
I have watched, there was a DVD that came out probably about 15 or so years ago of some highlights of World of Sport, because obviously I'm not really of that generation. I do remember Lou Richards commentating still in the 80s, but that's about it. But Bob Davis, I miss out on the Jack Dyer era. But, geez, they got up to some shenanigans on that show. Looked like a hell of a lot of fun.
Well, my understanding was they'd get there at about 10:30 on a Sunday morning, and the very best radio programs, and in fact podcasts, as we are demonstrating, are generally done by saying, right, we ready? No preparation, no rehearsal, no nothing. And these guys used to turn up at 10:30, open a few long necks, get stuck into it, and did the show pretty much, 2 or 3 stubbies in, and it generally showed as the show went on.
Yeah, and you could see the cigarette smoke wafting around the studio, which was the fashion of the time. You couldn't do that now, and rightly so. Yeah, no, good days. And yeah, you could sort of see watching the footy show in the 90s where they got a lot of, especially the Sunday footy show more so, where they got a lot of their inspiration from.
Yep.
Back when, the footy show was worth watching. But yeah, football, those sort of variety football shows on TV haven't really lasted, have they? There's not really any around. There's one on Fox Footy that I've never watched with Nathan Buckley and John O'Brien, I think. But
as two devotees of the great man who wore number 16 in a northern state, do yourself a favour and don't watch it. It's dreadful. It is evidence that being good footballers doesn't necessarily mean that you're a comedian.
Yes, well, I think a lot of
you've got Russell Robinson playing guitar gives you some insight as to the budget on musicians.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was the flavour of the month for a while back in the day. I think he might have been in that band with Jimmy Manson and Mark Zanotti for a while.
I think you're right, yes.
Yeah, they actually had Zanotti on the front bar recently. And
yeah, I saw him.
Yeah. Geez, he's still looking good.